Hello, everyone. I know I've been gone for a while, but I just finished this show and we absolutely have to unpack it. I am energized. I am ready to discuss it because I'm just very upset at how some people are receiving this series. So, Defending Jacob is a show, the first show that I've watched from the Apple TV Plus streaming platform. It stars Chris Evans, Michelle Dockery, and Jaden Martell, along with several others. And it is an amazing show. I was recommended or put onto it by a fellow YouTuber that I watch. Her name is Pay or Wait. Well, that's the name of her channel. Her name is Sharonda. So she's really good. So shout out to Pay or Wait. Make sure you check them out or check her out. Amazing channel. However, this show is based on a book of the same name, also called Defending Jacob, and it follows this family. What basically has happened within this show is that the father, played by Chris Evans, his name is Andy, he's a lawyer, and he has a son named Jacob, played by Jaden Martell, and then he has a wife named Lori, she's played by Michelle Dockery. So he's a lawyer. I believe Lori, she works at a elementary school, and of course, Jacob, their son, he goes to a local high school. So what ends up happening is one of Jacob's classmates ends up being murdered, and basically Jacob is pinned with the murder. They find Jacob's fingerprints on the boy's jacket, so he becomes the prime suspect. So you follow this family as they're trying to defend their son in this murder trial. And so the finale was tonight, and finally we get some type of clarity about everything that has happened, although some people seem to still be a bit confused. So before I get into all of that, I just want to say this. The characters and the performances in the show were amazing. I'm always drawn into dramas like this, these typical run-of-the-mill things that could happen in everyday life, typical situations that are defining moments for characters. And let me tell you, Chris Evans does an amazing job. He is so good in his role that by the end of it, he just blends into this character. He's very passionate, he's very believable, and at the same time, his wife, Lori, she's also very believable as well, as playing this mother who is unsure of whether or not her son really did it. And then in addition to that, the son, Jacob, he also does a really good job. His performance is very nuanced, but he does a good job at making you unsure of whether or not you should believe him. So that is my biggest regard to this show. The three main actors and the one actress, or you could just say actors in general, they are absolutely amazing in this show. And if not anything else, it is worth watching. But what makes this show so great is the ending of it. In particular, the show, I believe, and I picked up on this from halfway through when they were doing the psychology evaluations that Jacob has to go through because they're trying to defend him in court. And the show, to me, really resonated with the mother's experience and what she went through. And the way that it ended, a lot of people are giving Lori a lot of flack. They are upset with Lori and what she had did, and I'm finding a lot of issue with that. So let's just go through this show and unpack the ending real quick. So the first thing that I want to address is the gaslighting that took place. So Andy is your run-of-the-mill father. He absolutely, sincerely believes that Jacob did not commit this crime. And at the same time, Lori wants to believe it too, but Jacob has somewhat of a checkered past. Like I said, mothers, they have a different relationship with their children than fathers. You know, your mother has you in her room for 9 months. She most of the time is your primary caretaker from the time that you are born up until you might be about 10 or 8 years old. She probably has spent more time with you personally than your father in a lot of cases, especially with his father being a lawyer. So mothers, they pick up on a lot of things. And she was more inclined throughout the series to believe that Jacob was actually responsible for this murder. However, she is constantly lied to and she is gaslit over and over again, not only by Jacob, but also by her husband, because her husband so so confidently wants to believe that Jacob did not do this. And so anytime she brings up any suggestion that he might have done it, or anytime she brings up any suggestion that evidence is the evidence is there, he always gaslights her, kind of like, why are you making our son out to be a murderer, and why can't you just believe him, and like, just what kind of parent am I? Which, of course, that's traumatic for her, because she doesn't think there's anything wrong with how she's feeling, because she's looking at everything that's right in front of her. Like, for example, when they were at the psych evaluation, and she asked the psychiatrist, she's like, do you think there's any chance that he could have done it? And the psychiatrist, of course, she can't possibly answer that. But when she's gotten to that point, at this point, Lori has been gaslit so much to the point that she doesn't know what to believe, because she's sitting there with all this evidence in front of her, and she knows her husband has just been telling her and hammering her like he didn't do it, and making her feel so terrible for being logical about the situation, that she wants the psychiatrist to kind of confirm what she's feeling and what she's believing as a mother. And then in addition to that, we also have Jacob, who honestly, in retrospect, Jacob was gaslighting them both, right? But Andy, being the character that he is, he was just so willing to believe that. And let's also get into Andy, because Andy is no saint. And everybody's saying like, oh, well, Andy deserved a better family. I guess you could say that. I would say they deserved a better son, but I don't think Lori was a terrible mother. I'm not going to say at all, but I don't think Lori had any fault up until the finale. Now, when it comes to Andy, his son did it. Like, let's pause right there, and I'm going to explain how we absolutely know that his son did it in a minute. But when it comes to Andy, in retrospect, knowing that his son did it, he's going around town as a lawyer. He's inserting himself into spaces and places that he's not supposed to be inserting himself into. He's coercing people into testifying, as we saw with the dude who was hanging out or exchanging favors with the child molester. He's stalking Andy's friends, threatening Andy's friends in order to give information. He's withholding information from Lori because he knew about those weird fetish sites that Jacob was going on, and he didn't say anything to Lori about them, which again, that is further gaslighting her, as if she just doesn't know what she's talking about. So Andy was definitely no saint, and he's running around town defending a murder. Now, I understand that's his son, but at the end of the day, we're going to call a spade a spade. Now, when it comes to whether or not he did it, so let's first of all look at all the evidence. Number one, Andy threw that knife away. So we never got to pull any DNA or anything off the knife that Jacob had. Andy threw it away. And again, another thing, tampering with evidence. Andy, why would you do that as a lawyer? Again, I understand you're protecting your son, but if you truly believe your son didn't murder that boy, you wouldn't have thrown that knife away. So that's number one in the case of us understanding that Jacob actually did commit the crime. In addition to that, too, we have the example of him writing about, in detail, about the murder. And now let's say this. You might say that that's not incriminating, but what type of person does that? Especially knowing that this is an open investigation and the person who committed it had yet to be caught. So what type of person does that? Even if he was, because when it came out on the previous episode that there was a written confession, I still was like, okay, well, even if that's the case, Andy is still sick in the head because he wrote a horror fantasy novel or short story about the murder in a gratifying way from the perspective of the murderer. So we have that as an example as well. In addition to that, we also understand, number three, we also understand that because they showed us what happened between the guy who was forced to confess to the murder by Andy's dad hired the hitman to do it, because we saw that, we can assume that it is true. The show has not given us any suggestion of the possibility that that would have been untrue. So we can assume that that is true. Now, if we assume that that is true, that that happened, then who else did it? Right? So if he was forced into a confession and then murdered to cover Andy's tracks, who is the other suspect? Why are people still saying, oh, well, I need to still know if Andy, or excuse me, not Andy, but Jacob. I still need to know if Jacob did it. What more do you need to know? They literally tell you in the show that he did commit this crime. Now, when we get to the finale and we get to the beach and they're in Mexico, what ends up happening with the girl that he meets? I believe her name was Holly. What ends up happening with the girl? She goes missing. Now, this is a big deviation from the book, and I don't want to spoil the book for any of you guys if you want to read it. Now, if you read the book, you will get a better understanding, and now that I've seen some discussion about it, I understand why they may have changed this ending from the book. It does make a little bit of sense, but even then, when you get to that point, and he gaslit her further because Andy finds out that his dad actually did cover up to protect Andy, and he still does not tell Lori after he said there would be no more lies. So again, you're gaslighting your wife into she doesn't know what to believe. So now this girl is missing, the shirt is missing, and she's freaking out. And then you tell her that they covered it up, and that was terrible for you to do because at that point he probably believed that Andy did murder, or excuse me, that Jacob murdered that girl. So now you tell her at this point, and what do you think she's going to do? She's going to believe that Jacob did it. And so even when the girl comes back, in the show, when she comes back, we still see, Lori is ready to get out of there. But at this point, she's still second guessing herself because she's kind of like, okay, well, did Andy do it? Or excuse me, did Jacob do it? Look, I keep calling Andy Jacob. Did Jacob do it? And when you think about it, Jacob as a character, like look at the beats of Jacob's character. And that's another hint towards the fact that he did do it. If you pay close attention to how Jaden Martell plays him, he does a really good job at walking that fine line. And if you know anything about a true sociopath, a sociopath is never going to confess to a murder. A lot of times sociopaths don't even believe in their mind, that they even murdered someone. Like sociopaths will kill people and just literally go around legit thinking they did not do it. They are seriously messed up in the head. And we know Jacob is messed up in the head because only somebody who is stone cold nuts would write a fantasy murder fic about their friend who was just killed. I'm sorry. Period. I mean, you could say a bully or whatever like that, period. And he keeps saying, oh, it was just a story. It was just a story. It was just a story. Like, Jacob, get out of here. So when Lori does what she does by the end of this, I believe, people want to say that she intentionally had done it, and maybe she did. And if she had intentionally done it, you have to understand the guilt and the gaslighting that went on for this woman to get to that point. I'm not saying she's justified, but in her mind, she's thinking, I brought this boy into this world who has taken another person's life. In the context of the show, Lori, in her mind of mine, knows it. It's kind of like when you know something, but you just want to hear it for that confirmation. Lori knows that he has done this because, again, who else did? There were no other suspects. There was nothing else that you could pin this on, and she got that confirmation from Andy. So Lori, in her mind of mind, knows it. She just wants to hear Jacob say it, and at this point, she's become so frustrated. But now at this point, and before she did it, remember she went to visit Ben's mom. We see her crying, drinking. She's hurt. She's in pain. She doesn't have her son, and Lori knows she still has hers. And that has a toll on a person, to know that the person that you brought, the only person you brought into this world, is a murderer. And there's no telling what else that he could have done. There's no telling if he had a hand. There's no telling that if, he knew that they were drugging that girl and he just left her there. You get what I'm saying? She just doesn't know. And Jacob, the way he's set up, so stone cold, so stoic, so unexpressive, that will drive a person crazy, especially if they suspect you of being a murderer. So she does what she did, but at the same time, I'm not going to say that her son was a sociopath. I'm not going to say that she wasn't justified. Was she justified in trying to take it into her own hands? No. But did Jacob deserve to live after what he did to that boy? I mean, and again, this is without context of the novel. Now, if you read the novel, you'll get a whole different context about exactly what had went down between all of them. Now, afterwards, the book, you know, not the book, but the show, Andy tells her he's not waking up. It's kind of like he's on life support and she's trying to be optimistic. So we can assume that Jacob is dead. Jacob has been killed. So now we get into this point where Andy is kind of caught up in it because, and I think that Andy is the main character for this reason. Andy got so caught up in trying to protect his sociopath of a son that he did it at the sake of his own wife's sanity. And I think in the end of it, Andy was relieved because he knows that he didn't have to deal with the burden of the guilt anymore. And I think in a way, Lori didn't either. And I think that's what happened by the end of this story. Like, neither one of them had to deal with the burden of the guilt of having this child that murdered another person. But at the same time, it's at what cost? It really tests how parents see themselves in relation to their children, how parents should go about protecting their children, what is too far, how much should you trust, how much should you believe your children, and at what point is it too much, right? And he did, like, that's what Andy did. He kept protecting this person, and Andy of all people knew, and he continuously protected Jacob. And the wife also knew in a way, like she knew in a way. She just needed that confirmation. She just needed Andy to support her, and he didn't. He knew and he didn't support her, and so at that point, it ends up costing him not only his wife's sanity but his son's life. Because had Andy just did what he was supposed to do, he could have had a son, but Jacob would have been, in jail. And it's important that what Jacob's dad tells him when he's in jail, he's like, I believe he says, are you going to be a hero or are you going to be a father? Which are two different things, because if he did the right thing, he would end up putting his son in jail and doing the right thing and being this, this hero, this man who ultimately made the morally correct decision. But then on the side of being a father is, I'm not making this morally right decision. I'm going to I'm going to protect my child who I know has killed someone, because this is my baby and I gotta protect and defend my baby at all costs. And that's funny because when people, oftentimes you'll hear people say, who is your hero? And people will say, my mom, my dad. But this show kind of blurs those lines, and the idea that parents are not always heroes. Parents are not always morally correct in protecting their children. And a parent protecting their child does not make them necessarily a good person, like a hero. It might make them a parent, but it might not make them a hero. And I think that's what's so beautiful about this show. And that's what we need to unpack. But let me just say, y'all need to lay up off of Lori, because Lori did what had to be. I mean, I'm not going to say she did what had to be done, but it wasn't her fault. Like, primarily this rests on Jacob. Jacob was the one who made the original murder, and Andy basically aided and abetted Jacob, and they basically both drove their mother crazy by gaslighting her for eight episodes. Like, I understand that people might have thought her character was frustrating, but you have to understand what gaslighting does to a person, and that's why it still happens in so many situations today. But regardless of the case, this was an amazing show. If you don't have Apple TV, the streaming service, I recommend that you try to get it and check it out, because this show is at least worth it. So watch this, cancel it. I don't know what you want to do. If you have, some type of streaming app, Fire Stick or something like that, please try to make sure you check it out, because it is amazing. There won't be another season because the book, it's just one ending to the book. But I hope you really enjoyed this review and this unpacking. Please leave some love in the comments and let me know what you think.